KTRS. Every Monday we check in with the Show Me Institute. Here is policy researcher Graham Rines. Graham, welcome to Big 550 KTRS.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
It would be a much better pleasure if we turned your mic on. Say that again. Pleasure to meet you.
It's a pleasure to meet you.
There you go. We got it going. All right, Graham. So you have done a new study on economic development in the St. Louis region. What have you learned?
Well, it's actually not me who conducted the study. It was the St. Louis Development Corporation. So that's just the jargon for the part of the city that administers tax increment financing, tax abatements.
Right.
What the researchers of that study found was plain and simple, flat out, very clear. Tax increment financing, or TIF, tax abatements, they cost the city hundreds of millions of dollars, and they do nothing for the economy.
So you're telling me that the organization that is in charge of economic development and in charge of handing out TIFs and all that type of stuff and lobbying for that, their own study says it doesn't work?
Well, more or less, yes. I don't know if they lobby for it, but they worked with researchers at local universities. And what this study found was that over the course of the last 15 years, these programs have cost the city over $700 million. So that's $700 million that didn't go to schools, didn't go to libraries, that aren't going towards basic government services. So that's a big cost to taxpayers. They've been lining the pockets of private developers. And usually these things are pitched as ways to invest in the economy, boost economic development. The study found they may put up shiny new buildings, but they don't create jobs and they don't rejuvenate neighborhoods.
$700 million, that's the number. Okay, we know that a TIF is only a portion of whatever building it is, right? So that's $700 million in economic incentives means it's, $4 or $5 billion in buildings. You wouldn't have gotten those $4 or $5 billion in buildings if you didn't give them the $700 million in economic incentives. So it's not. So my question to you is, St. Louis would look very differently and have a lot less shiny new buildings and a lot less jobs if that $5 billion wasn't spent.
That's one way to look at it. But when you look at where these incentives are being doled out, I know last week my colleague Michael Highsmith was on talking about the boulevard development. We can look to Clayton, to Centene, one of the most profitable businesses around right now. It's really hard to kind of imagine how these areas, these businesses would need hundreds of millions in taxpayer subsidies.
I guess the question is, but for the TIF, right? So would Centene have built a new headquarters if they didn't get a TIF? And that's sort of hard to know. We don't have a lot of economic data on people saying no and then them building it anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is hard to gauge what doesn't happen or what could have happened empirically.
Right.
But what we do know is that TIF and tax abatements were implemented to try to fight urban blight.
Right.
And if we go around trying to convince taxpayers that they should have, less funding for their schools and libraries because downtown Clayton is blighted, I think we've kind of mixed. We're not looking at downtown Clayton, long and the short of it.
Yeah. So I love this, that according to this study, each job created by a TIF in 2015 cost more than $53,000. Explain what they mean by that.
So when you look at recent reports, you can look at how much in tax revenue has been diverted with TIFs. And when you look at that number and you look at the number of jobs that are claimed to have been created with that funding, it's just real simple arithmetic. What you see is that these jobs, the few jobs that are created, are incredibly, incredibly expensive.
What about, they say that incentivized areas do not see increased employment? How is that possible?
You know what? I am not completely sure. It seems counterintuitive. But when you look at the data, you look at the census data, what we see is that just a handful of neighborhoods are getting a ton of TIF, a ton of tax subsidies, and the employment in those areas is not lifting up because of that.
Right.
So the job figures on TIF and tax abatement are really abysmal. These programs are not helping to bring jobs to the area as officials and developers are claiming that they will.
I'd love to see a chart of all the developments that got some type of TIF, right? As you say, they go into well-known areas like Clayton, like Kirkwood, like some of the more affluent communities, whereas there aren't a whole lot of people banging down the door to get a TIF in, say, North St. Louis City.
Yeah, that's right. And whether that's a fault of developers or the programs or what, it's just this research that we're looking at now. It's showing that the incentives are almost all in just a handful of neighborhoods that are economically doing quite well. And so it should cause us to stop and think for a moment and really consider how effective these incentives are.
One more, the mills.
The mills.
Let's talk about the mills for a moment, because that is an epic failure.
That's right. Originally, so this development, it's a mall out in the county, I believe. I was there when I had first moved to St. Louis.
So it's, was it 364? Is that what it is out there?
Yeah, I think it was built 2003, maybe?
2003, 2004, and gigantic in the middle of a cornfield. Had everything known to man. Had the blues practice out there. They got every benefit, every tax benefit in the world. What happened to the mills?
Yeah, so the mills, long and the short is the mills has failed. It was originally valued at nearly $120 million. It got nearly $20 million in tax subsidies. Just the other year, it was auctioned off for less than 10% of its original valuation. It failed to create even 50% of the jobs it was projected to. And taxpayers are essentially on the hook for it. Taxpayers lined the pockets of these developers, padded their bottom line, took a risk, and taxpayers got no return on their investment.
But at least we can use that to write off our federal income taxes for the next number of years. Oh, no, wait, no, we can't do that, can we? All right, Graham, one more time. Who did this study?
Who did the study? The St. Louis Development Corporation. It's an arm of the city of St. Louis.
Right.
And they worked with researchers at St. Louis University and University of Missouri St. Louis.
Any hope that they'll actually take their own advice and their own study?
We can only hope. I'm not a policymaker. I'm just a policy researcher. But again, my colleague Mike Highsmith and I have a lot of we're writing a lot on this. You can look at the website, showmeinstitute.org, and we kind of canvass the study, break it down, make it really easy to understand. And again, the message is we're paying tons of money for these programs, and they're not panning out.
And what's the website to find out more?
You can learn more at showmeinstitute.org.
And next story, we're going to tell you how Maryland Heights wants to give Stan Kroenke a big TIF to make another Walmart in a floodplain. Graham Renz, hey, good job. First time, long time. Good to have you on. Well, we'll look forward to you. Graham Renz is a new policy researcher at the Show Me Institute, and he's here with us on the Big 550 KHRS. Thanks, buddy.
Thank you.